Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Art History Society's Spring Symposium Series, Art in Our Lives, a bi-weekly video lecture series scheduled for every other Thursday until the end of spring semester. The theme of this series is to tell you all the many ways that you can be part of the art world, from educators to creators. We hope to highlight these professional experiences in order to inspire and instigate the opportunities and capabilities that exist within the art world. Today, we have an experienced composer, multi-instrumentalist, improviser, and educator of Mesoamerica music, Mr. Christopher Garcia. He will discuss his music and composition career in the arts, where he will be lecturing on his collaborations and experiences. He is a skilled in drum set, percussions of North and South India, indigenous instruments of Mesoamerica, in world music settings with a variety of collaborations in music, dance, film, poetry, education, and multimedia. His research interest focuses on the history and music of Mesoamerica and sharing his vast knowledge with the world. Please keep your video off and your microphones muted. You can type your questions in the chat and we will ask them after the video lecture during our 15-minute Q&A. And I myself, my name is Marcos. I'm the Vice President of AHS. I also wanted to introduce President here, Christopher Garcia, Gabriel, Sara Salcido, Gabriela Dillard, and of course our members of AHS. And I will pass the baton to Mr. Garcia so he can begin his lecture.
Thank you very much for the introduction.
My pleasure. And thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, to be a part of this. I'm going to give some background on how and where I got to where I ended up. So I'm going to start with some context. I was born and raised in East Los Angeles. This is East Los Angeles looking at downtown Los Angeles. It's actually about 4.5 miles from East LA. It kind of looks like the Emerald City from the Wizard of Oz, but it's obviously not that. This is where I grew up, how I grew up. We were members of Our Lady of Guadalupe Parish. These are pictures of the procession, that Our Lady of Guadalupe procession that has been going on since 1931 up to the present. And this is the old church, which is no longer with us, on the left, and the new church, meaning 1967, on the right. And below that is a mural by Paul Boteo, who's a muralist, an excellent muralist. His brother is David Boteo from the Street Scrapers, who did murals all over Los Angeles. And they're all members of the same little parish that I'm part of. So 1968, I know we've been through a lot with COVID, but in 1968, the same type of thing was happening. The world seemed to be falling apart. The Tet Offensive was starting in Vietnam. There were walkouts, the student walkouts in East LA. Some 30,000 students marched out at the same time from Garfield, Roosevelt, Lincoln, Belmont, Wilson, Venice, and Jefferson High School. The thing to keep in mind about this is that there were no cell phones or social media, right? So this was a coordinated effort by young people, 14 through 18, which really scared a lot of people, because when they saw that young people could get together and mobilize, it was a frightening thought for a lot of the people in the middle of the war. And then, of course, Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 5th, 1968. 2 months later, Robert Kennedy was assassinated in Los Angeles. The Tlatelolco massacre happened in Mexico City when the Olympic Games were happening. And there, I'm not mentioning a lot of the things that were going on in other countries, but if you look up what events that transpired in 1968, it's pretty astounding. And of course, to top off that year, Richard Nixon was voted president of the United States. These kinds of statistics that we're seeing, they would be shown nightly at the end of the news. When you're watching the news, the last thing they would show was how many people we had killed or wounded and how many of us had been killed or wounded. And while now it's just a footnote on a PowerPoint presentation, it was not at home. I remember going to funerals at least once a month, if not twice a month, for a long time in East Los Angeles, losing young men between 18 and 22. The image on the left is 387 pages of young men from California who died during the Vietnam War. And these pictures here, we were having a war on multiple fronts, at home and abroad. And the image that says 1965 is actually the Watts riots in Los Angeles. The image of 1968 was the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. And the image from 1970 was the Chicano Moratorium in Los Angeles, East Los Angeles, California. We used to make the procession. I used to walk with my father until he could no longer make the walk. And we would start at the War Memorial in East Los Angeles and end at East LA College. This gentleman in the middle is Albert Aviles. I was part of this procession. I was 8 or 9. He had just come back from Vietnam, and the left side of his skull had been shot off. And he wore a metal plate in his head and did the walk in full Marine dress, full dress. We made that walk with him, with me by his side. I wasn't sure exactly what I was supposed to do. If he couldn't, I didn't know if he was going to even make the walk, but he did. He did, and that's another story I might get into at the end. But he is still with us. In 1970, the Kent State Massacre, that's what it's called. 4 students were killed at Ohio State University. There they are at the bottom. Allison Beth Krause, William Knox Schroeder, Sandalee Schnauer, and Jeffrey Glenn Miller. So this shouldn't have happened, right? It's 4 young people in a university very far away from the war, protesting the war, being killed by National Guard. So the war was all over the place. It wasn't, we saw it every day on the news. Every day they would show every day what had happened. This is the Chicano Moratorium. Just to give you, once again, Kent State's on May 4th, 1970. 3 months later, the Chicano Moratorium happens. It's the largest peaceful demonstration against the war. And 4 people were killed that day. They were not college students. They were just human beings that happened to be participating, protesting the war. And Ruben Salazar, who was a bilingual journalist, was also was killed that day by the sheriff's department. And that's what we dealt with at home. But what happened is the youth became mobilized, and that really scared a lot of people. Like I said, there's no social media, there's no cell phones, but yet you have people getting together of all colors, all nations, to register and vote, to try and make a change. And here's the statistics of the war. This is an acknowledgement for those who went and never came back, and for those who came back but never returned. You can see 68 is the worst part of the war. And you can see how the numbers are going down. Nixon is president at this point. People are protesting every day. And 1971, if you're old enough to fight for a country and die for a country, you're now given the right to vote in the country. Meaning that things can change. they will. And a lot of times it seems the political situations we are in seem to be overwhelming. But we just have to stay the course and do what we know is the right thing to do in order to get to the next level. So music making, East LA. This house on the bottom is where we used to rehearse, and there used to be a garage on the left of the house. There was a local band that used to go there and play, and the drummer's name was Richard Luna. He was known as Kuma, and he would. I wasn't playing anything at this point. I was like 11 years old, and he was like 18. So I would go watch them play, and he noticed I was watching him play. And one day he said, "You know, you should sit behind me in a chair, and you can watch me play," which is what I did. And then eventually he said, "You know, I don't live here, but my instruments are here. So anytime you want to play the instruments, you know, feel free to come and play." So we put bands together, and we were playing music by, you know, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, King Crimson, Flash, Edgar Winter and the White Trash. It's an actual name of a band at the time. And so that's the music we were playing. And once again, this is not on the radio. Radio did not exist unless you had an FM radio. And at that point, most people only had AM radio. So this was all underground, right? You can't go on YouTube. You can't download it. You can't do that. You have to go to places and look for a place to get it. But in my home, my mother used to sing songs. My mother used to be a singer. And she was singing songs by Libertad Lamarque and Carlos Gardel and Lola Beltran, music she had sung when she was younger with her uncles, her two uncles, when they used to tour the West Coast. And my sisters, my family would listen to stuff by Joni Mitchell, Jackson 5, the Beatles, whatever was happening. And once again, this is not being played on the radio. Like, you'd have to know you wanted to look for this to find it. During that time, during a break at that house, I went upstairs, and the mother of the bass player said, "Oh, I want you to hear this." And she played a record of a gentleman, the first gentleman on the top, named Alaraca, singing. And well, I didn't know it was him. You heard somebody drumming, then you heard somebody singing, then you heard somebody singing and drumming. And I did not realize at the time that that was actually one person doing all of those things by himself. So that was really intriguing to me. So I'm still playing rock and roll and rock and all that stuff, and playing concerts and that kind of thing. But this Indian music really resonated with me, and I wanted to know about it. So of course I went to the East LA Library, and the building on your bottom left, if you look at it, it's three structures. You see a structure in the front and a structure in the back and a structure on the side. Well, our library was actually the first structure. It's like 600 square feet. And then they eventually made the larger library on your right in 1972. And at that point in time, you know, there's still no internet, right? And at that point in time, you can only check out books that were in your library. You couldn't ask another library to send books to your library, which you can do now. So when I told my parents I wanted to study Indian music, their question, of course, was, why? So I told them it's really what I wanted to do. And my parents said, well, I have no money for you to go to university. So they said, check with your high school counselor and find a school that's accredited that can take you there. So in the meantime, I went to Aaron Record Store, which used to be on Melrose. Used to be able to buy used records for $1. So you could buy $5 of 5 records of Indian music for $5 and listen to them on a turntable. This is before world music existed as a genre. There would be 5 records of Indian music, 5 records of African music, 5 records of Chinese music, and that was called the international section. World music did not exist. And once again, you had to go look for it. It wasn't on the radio. So I found out there was 3 universities that I could go to that were accredited. One was Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut. But at that point in time, I don't know what it's like now, but you could only get financial aid if you were a resident of Connecticut, which I was not. I went to UCLA to check that out, but there was a lot of bad history I had personally with UCLA when I went there the first time. So the third possibility was California Institute of the Arts, which at that point had 375 students. They have 1,500 now in the same space. So I called up Cal Arts and spoke to this gentleman, John Bergamo, and he said in order to go there, I had to play a melodic instrument. And I asked him, I said, I don't actually, John, I'm not sure what that means. And he said, you know, something you could play a melody on, you know, a saxophone, a violin, you know, a trumpet, which was funny because we were percussionists. So I told him I can't do that. He said, why not? I said, I don't have any money for an instrument. I don't have any money for lessons. You know, the drums I own, I have to borrow drums to play concerts because we all shared our instruments to play, the different musicians in the community. So he said, well, where do you live that you can't get an instrument? And I said, I live in East LA. And John was from New Jersey. And he's like, I don't know where that is. I said, well, if you ever been to City Hall downtown? He goes, yeah. I said, well, go east on First Street for 4 miles, and that's East LA. So he said, is there a junior college by you? And I said, yes. And the junior college was East LA College. Now, I had already been attending East LA College as a 10th grader in my local high school, because at that time you could go to junior college and take courses. So at East LA College, I was taking philosophy, psychology, and the history of Mesoamerica, 1975. That was what I was studying. So I went there, and the two teachers there, the only teachers there that had doctorates were the two music teachers, Dr. Overmeyer and Dr. Hollis. And believe it or not, I couldn't find a picture of them on the internet. The only thing I could find is a picture of Dr. Hollis from one of them, an album. An album is a black thing with a hole in the middle you put on a phonograph record. And he donated the music library in Los Angeles City College is named the Dr. Truett Hollis Music Library. So these two gentlemen prepared me to go to audition to Cal Arts, which is what I did. After 9 months, I once again stood in front of Mr. John Bergamo and auditioned for him. And I was able to, quote unquote, I was able to pass the audition and get a full scholarship to study at California Institute of the Arts. And I went in as a first-year student. Most people there were either last year in their bachelor's program or first year in their master's program. And, you know, East Los Angeles is 99.9% Mexican and one of the most densely populated places in the United States, still to this day. So when I went to Cal Arts, there were 375 students, and most of them were from out of state or out of the country. So I was definitely in another world. And I had a full scholarship, which means that I had to cover my books, I had to cover my food, I had to cover my housing, which we couldn't do. So I lived on a gallon of apple juice, a dozen tortillas, and about 3 pounds of raw chili. And that's what I ate, because I know nobody would eat that food in the shared refrigerator. So now I'm at Cal Arts, and I'm studying with this gentleman, Pandit Tarnath Rao, studying Indian music, Indian drumming, and its history. And once again, I'm from East Los Angeles. My culture and ethnicity is Mexican, very far from India. There are no Indians even to this day in East Los Angeles. So it wasn't scary in the sense of I don't know these cultures, they don't know my culture. It was more like just like wow, it was like being thrown into this ocean of stuff that I knew nothing about. And so I had never had lessons because I never could pay for lessons. So I was always by ear. So now I'm in an oral history. Everything is taught orally in this tradition. What I didn't know is that in order to maintain my scholarship, I had to learn Western percussion. So I was in the Cal Arts Percussion Ensemble, the only award-winning Cal Arts Percussion Ensemble we did a competition with 25 universities west of the Mississippi, and we won all of the categories across the field there. And we were playing music by definitely music. It wasn't Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. It was John Cage, Frank Zappa, Arthur Jarvinen, Henry Cowell, Edgar Varese, Lou Harrison. Music considered avant-garde or creative new music, and with instruments I did not know. I had not played. So, I'm going from East Los Angeles to this world of Indian music and Indian drumming, and also this world of Western music and Western classical music and Western thought in regards to music as sound. And I'm also studying with these three gentlemen. After my teacher died, he passed away, my mentor, John Bergamo, he had told me there was a point where I had to leave Cal Arts because I started working. And I was on a scholarship, and when I was living there, I was there all the time. But after that, I wasn't there. I was only there 1 day a week instead of 7 days a week. And I told him I didn't want to stay there and take up a spot that he could give to somebody else. So he asked me a question. The question was, what is it you want to do? And when I told him what it is I wanted to do, he said, oh, you don't have to go to school to do that. So I left, and I started playing and making music, first and foremost throughout the United States and in Canada, mostly on these continents first, with a number of bands. I'm going fast because I can actually spend 4 hours on each group, which I cannot do. So I'm just showing you the names in case there's a question at the end. Playing all kinds of music, rock or jazz fusion or avant-garde. Meanwhile, still playing Indian music and Indian drumming and doing the avant-garde classical thing. So all of these things cross-pollinate with each other. I was also working with poets, Poet Laureate Robert Pinsky, Mark Webber, and Dorothea Grossman, who they each used music and sound and resonance in very different ways from each other. Nothing was ever the same between them or with them or within them when we were together working. So all of these things are constantly going on. It's not like I went from one to the other. But the one thing that was always the same was the concept of improvisation, in the moment, at the moment, every moment, and never the same way once, which is kind of like life. Every moment is a different moment. And that's one of the things I realized in playing music. Music only exists from when it starts. There's silence before you start, and then you play, and then it stops, and then there's silence. And what you are left with, and the people that are there that experience it are left with, are the resonance of that memory. In 2000, John Bergamo called me and said, I want you to go in my place to Korea. There's going to be 8 concerts of improvised music. You will be playing with people you don't know. And you're going in my place. It wasn't so much a request, it was kind of like an order. So I went to Korea, and the one gentleman I knew, Gustavo Aguilar, the other two, Takinojo Mochizuki and Park Jae-chung, I did not know. I did not know anything about the percussion or the music of Japan. I knew little to nothing of the music of Korea, but I was playing Indian drums. So the thing was to be in the moment, at the moment, every moment. And there was no common ground. There was no common vernacular. Each instrument, each kind of music has its own vernacular. The way you play North Indian music is not the way you play it on Chera music. The way you play it on Chera music is not the way you play Mesoamerican music. So each thing has its own resonance and its own culture. So one of the great lessons was, here's a quote by Marina Abramovich. If you talk about immaterial art, music is the highest, absolutely highest art of all, because it's the most immaterial, meaning that you can't touch it. So the one thing I learned from playing with these folks was that music is more than a skill set, because no matter what I knew or thought I knew or wanted to do, you had to be in the moment with these people because they were only in the moment. It didn't matter what you knew. You knew, so imagine you're sitting at a table with 3 other people that don't speak the same language, but you're going to communicate and you're going to be with them for hours. So these concerts took place over a 14-day period, and we lived together those 14 days. So we evolved, and one of the things I learned that was very important was the importance of silence in creating music. I kept on playing music with all of these groups, touring the United States and Europe, and Asia and Australia, and working with dance companies where you created music on the spot with them, in the moment, at the moment. All these dance companies work differently. Some of them would give you a time frame. I need music for 4 minutes and 39 seconds, or they would have an arc that they asked you to create music for. And all of them work differently. So you just have to it's not about coming and knowing and doing what you know. It's about coming and being willing to do what you don't know. I was still playing with orchestras, chamber orchestras and symphonic orchestras. At that time, mostly European inflected music, here and abroad, in the United States and in Europe. This gentleman, I ended up playing with him at Wesleyan University, the university that I had wasn't able to go to. I eventually taught at UCLA too, by the way, as a substitute teacher. So all of these things this arc is very strange in that usually you do something and then you leave it and you go to the next thing. But the way this evolved is you did it and you kept doing everything the same, with the same across this arc. I was doing multimedia collaborations with starting to get involved with indigenous Mexican and Mesoamerican stuff with people like Luis Perez Ichonesle, who did the infinite expansion of sound, and also the Dawn of Mankind, which is based on the Popol Vuh. We were doing this real time with Mesoamerican instruments, also with Nuevo Mundo Chicas and Resonancia, which was a high watermark for me because Resonancia featured indigenous musicians playing with folkloric playing with classical musicians, create a new resonance. So music now is on tap, like a lot of other things. But music before was always music as ritual. Music was for a specific event. It was for a birth, a wedding, a funeral, etc. It wasn't something you put on when you washed your car. Not that there's nothing wrong with washing your car, but it required more of you to be there, and more for the musicians as well. So what has changed, what I have seen change, is the intention behind the music and the musicians and the audience. About 18 years ago, we started working in the playing indigenous instruments at La Virgen de Guadalupe, that is put on every year by the Los Angeles Theater Center. And this picture was actually taken by the young man in the front. His name is Martin Gardo. And you could see on the left, there's people dressed in indigenous Mexica Azteca clothing. There's people, so we're surrounded by danzantes. We're surrounded by folkloric musicians. That's Alfredo Lopez Mondragon on the right. We're surrounded by actors, and you can see all the regalia and stuff behind us. At this time also, I amassed the chamber and symphonic music by Mexican composers. Music written in the 1930s, when there was a nationalistic movement across the world, That's why we have music by Bartok and Stravinsky and Charles Ives, et cetera, et cetera. And this was from the Mexican side. And what these gentlemen did is they wrote symphonic music incorporating indigenous instruments of Mexico into their scores. And the person on the bottom is Joseph Julian Gonzalez, who wrote Misa Azteca, which is based on the Cantares Mexicanos. And it actually features indigenous percussion with a full orchestra and a choir singing in Spanish and Latin and Nahuatl. So Joseph's at the end of that arc, still in that arc, but the music from Chavez and the Revoltas is from the 30s. I started listening to and playing with all of these drummers. In the middle are the instruments of Mesoamerica. The tall drum is the tlapanhuehuet. These on the bottom are called teponazlis. The shell is called ayotapaut. I'm sorry, these are in Nahuatl. The rattle is called ayakashli. The caracol, the horn, is called atecopoli. So I started learning the rhythms played by danzantes. Okay. And most of them had studied with the same maestro, which means that they all played the rhythms. Sorry about that. They all played the rhythms with the same sticking. Every sticking has its own very specific sound, the way you stick. So Martin Gardo was the first person who was like 30 years younger than me that I learned from. And he had learned from his sister, whose name is Belen on the bottom right. And he also learned from Gabriel Castañeda and Eric Barraza. And I eventually met Raymond Ramirez, who had actually worked with the maestro of their maestro when he first came to Los Angeles, when the 12 from Mexico City, the Danza Aztecas, first came into the United States to stay in Los Angeles. Also, in the context of the La Virgen, there's music by post-invasion instruments, string instruments, played by Alfredo Lopez Londregon and Jorge Andres Herrera. And so I was getting the indigenous side and I was getting the folkloric side. I was getting both sides. And that's when I, what came to mind is that ethnicity is not culture, meaning that if I go to DF right now, if I go to Mexico City and bring a 30-year-old and have him meet a 30-year-old from East Los Angeles, their root is Mexican, but they have grown up in different soil, different air, and different water. And actually, a friend of mine, a Japanese elder, George Abe, he has a shakuhachi that he plays from the village that he grew up in Japan. And he had a friend of his in the same village a couple of years ago, and he asked him to bring back a piece of bamboo, the same bamboo that his flute is based on, and grow it in Los Angeles. So what happened? The same bamboo from the same tree does not have any of the qualities that the original one did, because the dirt of Los Angeles is not the dirt in Japan. The air of Los Angeles is not the air in Japan. And the water in Los Angeles is not the water in Japan, even though they share the same root. So after doing the physical drumming, I went into books and started reading as much as I could, going to lectures, symposiums, listening, learning, and reaching out to people, reaching out to archaeologists, historians, anthropologists. If there's something I needed to know or felt that I should know and I didn't know, I reached out to these people. And I asked them, they're, as a stranger, they don't know me at all. And I would say that 99% of them responded. And I would say, I'm looking for information on Malinalco. And they would say, oh, there's a dissertation here, you could read this. There's this dissertation here, you should read that. So so I was getting the information the way ancestrally we used to do it, the red and black, meaning that physically experiencing it, doing it as much as you can, and then studying it as well. And coming to realize that understanding is not agreement. Because when you do these different things, when you're playing with indigenous musicians, they don't normally go to folkloric concerts, and people that play folkloric music don't go to indigenous concerts, and classical musicians don't go to either of that. So there was this I was able to go back and forth between these things, just because of the practical experience of having experienced it. And this was I'm going to read this. From the remaining exemplars of Aztec instruments preserved in the National Museum of Mexico, we may infer that the music of the people during the pre-conquest era was as barbarous and harsh as were the ceremonies at which their music was heard. They are not instruments capable of producing either alone or in conjunction with each other a grateful harmony, nor can the sound of any of them induce a spiritual response that is in harmony with presently accepted standards of behavior. This was published by under the official direction of General de las Bellas Artes, El Arte Musical in Mexico by Alba Herrera y Ogazon, who is considered the first musicologist of Mexico. And I looked her up the other day just to see where she is thought of now in this arc. So in 2017, 100 years after this, she's still revered as a for her points of view. So what this did is I realized that I was playing these instruments in orchestral and chamber settings, but like Los Angeles, they do a thing on LA Phil, they do a thing on European composers or American composers or Latin composers. It's once a year, so you get to hear this music once a year. So I decided to compose music for these instruments with other instruments of Western European tradition. So I started writing music first for Quinteto Latino or Woodwind Quintet, and we played music. We did, I think, 12 concerts in San Francisco, Oakland, Monterey, San Jose, etc. After that was Mexican music with classical guitar with Geronimo Reichenberg. After that was Music Beyond Borders, music for pedal harp with Tasha Smith Godinez. After that was Mexico Atemporal with piano forte with Pablo Leñero Archer. And now Aquí y Ahora with Pablo Calagero, who is Puerto Rican ancestry. So I brought those instruments into a contemporary setting. Now it's been about 15 years I've been composing and playing this music on 5 continents. And after getting this information, learning this information, working with all these different people, I decided to do lectures on the instruments and present them at churches, colleges, libraries, museums, schools, and universities. And one of the first things I did was I made 8 YouTubes over a period of a year, demonstrating each instrument in and of itself. I think it's been 5 years since the first one. And now there's 120,000 visitors to those YouTubes. So, so when you put something on YouTube, you have to put a tag on the video. So the only tag for those videos was the name of the instrument in their native language, Nahuatl. So you would have to know what a teponazli is in order to type in teponazli. You'd have to know what a tlapanhuehuet was in order to, because I wanted to see how many people were looking. And what I found out is 120,000 people were looking, which is overwhelming. And also, I should say, in all of these YouTube videos, I made sure that the only thing that you saw was the instrument in my hands. And this goes back to indigenous thought and culture. there's no signature on the bottom of a pyramid. There's no signature on a vase. There's no signature on a fresco, because they were dealing with now, and now only happens now. It was not about being recorded for posterity or being remembered for posterity. It was about now. We actually have 530 codices of the Mexica people. Mexica is what the people call Aztec people, from the 16th century, that were either original codices or replicated from memory. You have to understand that 80 to 90% of the indigenous people of the Americas, meaning Canada, North America, Mexico, Central America, South America, 90% of this indigenous population died. So while there are other, like the music of India is still very much alive, as is the music of Egypt and China and Japan, they did not lose 90% of their people. So the fact that we have anything left and that it still continues to resonate is astounding. But we do not have recordings of the music. So we have the instruments, but we don't know how the music was structured. We don't know that for sure. We don't have that. I could say the same thing for Egypt. We don't have recordings from Egypt either. But I mean, people continue to play those instruments, but they did not lose 90% of their people. So only 10% of their people carried on these traditions, despite and in spite of everything that was happening to them. This is a poem from the Cantares in idioma mexicano. The poem is called Chopin Cuicat. It says, the huehuet is the large ceremonial drum. And it says, I am playing my huehuet, I who hunt for songs, to awaken and fire our friends, whose hearts lie listless, for whom the day does not yet break, those who sleep in comas, those who glory in gloomy night when the flowering dawn already sings her song, and when once again morn lightens the place where the huehuets play. I've been able to take this information and share it and continue learning from everyone I come into contact with that knows more than me, because there's always people that know less than us, and there's always people that know way more than us. And this is why we have to stay humble, or we will not learn. I've been able to do this with my family now. My family has performed with me in Mexico for the first time a couple of years ago. And the larger picture is with my daughter, Alegria, and we're performing at Herb Alpert Music Recital Hall, Los Angeles City College. The pictures on the bottom are from San Miguel Allende, concerts in San Miguel Allende, with my wife and my daughter. My wife, Yolanda, read from the Cantares in Spanish, and Alegria and I played, and Alegria sang. I keep getting invited to. I've been playing in Mexico since 2005, so I keep getting invited to go back and share the history of the instruments, because I'm coming at it from a different inflection. I'm not coming from a danza only inflection. I'm coming at it from a drumming inflection through the music inflection. The problem with when we first get access to this information. So this information is, remember, there was no YouTube, there was no internet when I was growing up. So you actually had to look for these, you had to go to this building with 4 walls, and that had these things called shelves, that had these things called books. And you had to look in the book to understand, to read, to learn. So what we need to do is to listen, to learn, to question, to educate ourselves, to elevate ourselves in order to understand. And this is like steps we need to go to get started at. We got to start somewhere in order to get to someplace. The problem is that when you first learn this information, when you first learn your cultural history, no matter what culture you're from, and you realize what was not taught to you, it's easy to get stuck when you get this information. And be angry and or resentful that you weren't taught this information. And this is where we get to at the moment with information, knowledge, and wisdom. Right now, everybody has so much access to data that we did not have before, that they're overwhelmed with the data. So information is information. Information is not knowledge. Knowledge is the experience of the information, is real time as often as possible. And eventually, hopefully, we will get to the wisdom stage. An example I like to use is if you give a frying pan, an egg, a pinch of salt, and a teaspoon of oil to yourself, to your mother and your grandmother, and you ask them to make an egg, one of those eggs is going to taste a lot better than the other, even though you have the same tools. So it's not just a matter of the tools. It's not just learning the information and or having that information turn into a chip on your shoulder because you weren't taught earlier and you feel like you're behind because you want to be ahead. So one of two things happen. That chip on your shoulder turns into a boulder, and that boulder will smash you down if you keep trying to hold it and hold on to it and tell everybody, look at the boulder. What you have to do is get all that information, go through that desert. And when you get to this point, you need to walk around the boulder. Because sometimes when we look at things, we see them as one thing. And we see it, we perceive it based on who we are, what we know, where we've been. And it's like, oh, this is what this is. This is all this is. But the longer you look at it, the longer you study it, the more you listen, the more you learn, the more you question, the more you understand, you'll find out that what appears to be one thing is actually something quite different. But we have to start with the information. We have to go somewhere so that we can get from this to this, which is the same. This is 1900. This is today. Same place. So we're left with, what are we left with? Well, it's easy to get stuck and caught up in what you've learned and wanting to share it and teach it from a specific perspective. But the one thing to keep in mind is that no matter how we choose to identify ourselves, ethnically, culturally, economically, politically, spiritually, by gender, etc., no matter which of those we choose, the one thing to keep in mind is that we each have 270 days, 6,480 hours, 388,800 minutes, and 23 million seconds of rhythmic training in our mother's womb. No matter where we come from, no matter what we know, what we think we know, what we want to know, this is what binds us as human beings. So in the end, what we find out is that we are each indigenous to the planet. So may we continue to, may we strive to live our lives with intention, with intensity, with integrity, with passion, and the most difficult, balance, in order to get to the next place that we have to get to. And may we always be open and aware, and we're human beings, so this happens to us. You know, sometimes we're more aware than others, sometimes we're less aware than others. Sometimes things resonate with us when we want them to resonate with us. Sometimes things resonate with us that we never thought would resonate with us. This is what happens. This is part of the arc of living and the arc of life. So I've been blessed to go from East Los to 28 countries on 5 continents, to Harvard last year and lecturing, to come back home. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here. and to share what I've learned and continue to struggle to learn. And I turn it back over to Marcos.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garcia. It was a beautiful presentation, and I love your trajectory, from East LA to where you're at now, and the various collaborations you have done over the years. I think it's really beautiful, but also it adds to your character, to your skill sets, and to who you are, as you summarize at the ending. It was also very beautiful that you were able to kind of collaborate with different cultures, Western, Eastern, but also indigenous cultures, where you have inputted your skill sets, but also a mutual understanding between these collaborations. And I think it's something that we must always acknowledge. And like you said, we're all humans, we're all here, we all have to be peaceful beings. And I thank you for that very much. And I think it's really beautiful that you kind of explain some of your history with us, but also what you have done and contribute in the music genre. I want to open the discussions for any questions for Mr. Christopher Garcia. There's a couple that people have been added to the chat, so I'm gonna ask one from Alegría Garcia, which is, what does playing improvised music feel like?
Well, it's basically what we're doing now. We're having a conversation. We're having a conversation, but in resonance. And what happens is, that's what silence, to learn silence was very important to me, because like in a conversation, you just don't keep talking and talking, right? You have to stop. And sometimes the other person stops too. And that's silence. That doesn't mean something has to happen. In the West, for males, it's always like you have to be doing something, like that concept is like you have to be in action all the time. But actually, you don't. The best thing to do sometimes is just to stop and listen.
Thank you for answering that question. I have a second question, and this one is from Daniel Witt. His question is, how did you learn to stick?
Well, it took it. So sticking, each sticking has a specific sound quality to it. I can't demonstrate because you'll hear it, but you won't see it. But each one has its own inflection of it's like if you just stop and think of saying a sentence, right? You can say a sentence 20 different ways, right? And it has different intention behind it. But so even though you know the words, it's the intention and inflection behind it that change you. Like when you're playing around, or I'm going to kill you. Your intention comes across, and the sound changes. But when you're playing, imagine you're having a conversation with 20 people. Sometimes 2 people talk at the same time, and they stop, and there's silence. And that's the same thing with music, and with drumming. And that's how I know where the drummer comes from, by how he sticks. The way they play a certain rhythm, I can tell who their teacher was without ever having to ask them who their teacher was.
Thank you for answering that question. And there's an additional question, and this one is from Gabriela, who is a member of AHS. And her question is there either an instrument or genre of music that you always wanted to learn but haven't had the chance to?
I don't think I've learned anything I do yet, actually. There's just so much. It's like each individual is like a aid. where you can hold up a jade with many facets, and you can look into each facet, and each facet is a world unto itself, but it's still part of the jade. And there's just so many. There's things I wish I could do better, and I'm not. I don't mean. I mean, it's just like in order to be able to do it better, you and to be humble, because, like I said, there's people that everywhere in the world I go, there are amazing musicians everywhere. I've never been to a place where it's like, oh, no, everywhere you go, and I don't mean quote unquote professionals. I mean, it might be a street musician, everywhere you go. So the thing is, there's art in everything and in everyone. There really is. And it's just about us being aware to be able to appreciate it without knowing, meaning that if you're given a meal and it's really good, I mean, you don't have to know what the ingredients are or how they were prepared in order to enjoy it. I mean, you can, if when somebody says, "Oh, you're going to really like this because it's this," you're probably not going to like it. As opposed to them saying, "Here it is," and here you go.
Thank you. I have a comment. I know in that presentation you mentioned improvise. There was a video I was watching last night by Jane Cortez, who is a poet and does a lot of collaborations with groups. And she mentioned an important comment, and I think it relates to your presentation, where she said that music is it's about freedom, being independent. It's one of those fields where you can be yourself. And I think, like you said, it's like music allows that space where art can be involved and you can be yourself. And I think it's great, as a great genre that we have, in society, that people can experience something, they haven't heard before, or yeah. I have a
well, when music is at go ahead.
No.
Sorry,
go ahead.
To me, when music is at its best, there is no I don't even like the word performer.
Mm-hmm.
The definition of performer is an entertainer, and I've never thought of myself as an entertainer, and I doubt if anybody else thinks I'm an entertainer. But it's more of an ofrenda, yeah. And so there is no performer, stage ends, and then the audience. Basically, when you're in the moment at the moment with the audience, they're hearing everything for the first time. You tend to hear everything you're doing through their ears. So it's a coming together of everybody at the same time. So if I can really quickly, that goes to the neurological and physiological aspects of music. They've recorded people, they've hooked them up with electrodes, they've monitored their heart rate, respiratory rate, oxygenization of their blood, brain waves. They played the same piece of music, at 4 hours apart, 9, 1, 5, and 9. And at the time of day, your body responds differently, right? They can actually see where your brain waves are activated and what part of your brain waves, whether you go to the alpha state or the non-alpha state. This is all done by music. The people of India, there's a treatise on this written 2,000 years ago on this specifically. So it's really interesting that while there was no written notation, there's no notation of Indian music by Indians in India, from their first 4,000 years, they did about what the music was about. So what music does to an individual, whether you're aware of it or not, it's affecting you in ways that maybe two-dimensional art cannot. And I'm not saying necessarily for the better, but go ahead.
Thank you. I have another question from Alegria. Her question is, how can we incentivize the younger generation, for example, those in high school, to enroll and pursue art, music, or art history? What works and what can be done to make that happen?
I think the best thing in general to do is to lead by example, is to reach out, because now what's happening now is Professor Pohl, when he was giving his lecture, he was saying I don't know if everybody understood what he was saying, but he was saying, in those days I had to go here, I had to go to a building, I had to go there. I couldn't just type it on my phone. I had to go look. And now everybody has access to this information. But what do we see? It's like saying, here's a hammer and a chisel and a piece of marble. That's what Michelangelo had. Well, like, yeah, I mean, that is what he had. Those are his tools, but we don't have his skills. So I think by leading by example, by what you guys are doing now, and by going to places where there's younger people to experience it, and to let them know it exists, it's very powerful. I can tell you, when I go to schools with young people, the response is immediate. You don't even have to. Sometimes I'll walk out and not say anything. I won't say a word. I'll just play, and they'll play back with me. We did this thing a couple of years ago with 600 students in a gymnasium from first grade to sixth grade, and they just all immediately played with whatever on their bodies, what we were playing, without having to say a word. But I think leading by example, the more you continue to do what you do, and hopefully not lose sight of your intention. Intention is very important, because people can see your intention. I believe they can see whether it's real or you're manufacturing it. Or there's lots of musicians I know, for example, when I play with an orchestra, they put their instrument in a case and take it home, and they're not going to touch it for another week. And so sometimes the art becomes a skill set, and they have forgotten their intention, why they picked it up to begin with, is what I have found. I'd like to read something to you really quick. This is from Man Ray, who's an artist. I guess you would call him a Dadaist, for lack of a better word, in terms of time frame. But he said, "I am a free man. I don't work for a patron or a boss. I am indifferent to things that do not interest me, but never would I attack them, especially in the creative arts. Because I say that anybody who does creative art is a sacred person. I don't care what they do. They can paint academic pictures, they can be modern, they can be different from anything else. They cannot do any harm. Whereas a bad politician, a bad doctor, or a bad cook can kill you."
Are there any other questions for Mr. Garcia?
I have a comment.
Yeah, I have a question from, I'll allow you for Alegria to make your comment, but I have a question from Olavo.
Okay.
His question is, have you had some opportunity to meet the jazz drummer Ayrton Moreira?
No, not yet. But like I said, there's no shortage of musicians. Everywhere I go, I've never not met an amazing musician, no matter where I go. It's always very humbling. Beyond humbling, actually. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say Ayrton Moreira? Is that the name you used, or did I mishear?
Ayrton Moreira.
I substituted for Ayrton Moreira. I did 3 concerts with him,
Oh,
and
really?
he had me substitute for him at UCLA. Yes, I know Ayrton. As a matter of fact, I can tell you, I came home one day and my wife said, "Some guy with a strange name called you. It said to call him back." I said, "Who is it?" She goes, "I don't know. I've never seen the name." But I wrote it down, and it's Ayrton, and I had already worked with him, so I knew who it was. So yes, I know. I'm sorry, I didn't understand at first. Yes, I have. I know him. I've worked with him, and he had me substitute teach for him at UCLA. He's a wonderful human being.
He is amazing. He is amazing. He is my friend.
He is amazing.
He is
Oh,
the man.
good. Oh, well, tell him hello if you see him. Yeah, he's a real sweetheart.
Do you know, one time I was with him, and the guy passed to him. They say, "Oh my gosh, you are Ayrton Moreira." Oh, they say, "Hey, oh, whoa, whoa, congrats! I'm so happy to see you. You was the jazz man. I know you."
Yeah, he's an amazing musician. He's been around a long time, still playing very well. He's like the godfather of percussionists in the United States, from his
Yeah.
work with Miles Davis to Quarteto Novo to all his work with Flora and Chick Corea and Hermeto Pascual.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, amazing musician.
He played with Chick Corea. He played with um,
Everybody.
yeah, yeah.
Yes, he does. He does that.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank
I'm
you,
sorry.
Oliver, for the question.
Yes.
Yeah, if that's all the questions, I would like to, on behalf of the Art History Society, we want to thank you all for coming out to support us in the arts. I would also like to thank our officers who are also in this meeting with us, and our members for continuing to give their support. We couldn't do it without you guys. Our organization is dedicated to community involvement in the arts and giving opportunities to everyone we can to learn and understand and pursue the arts. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more of our events and more information on our upcoming guest speakers that will be speaking on April 8th at 6 p.m. I'm also going to insert our Instagram handle and YouTube channel for you to find more information, but also videos of lectures. And without further ado, I want to thank everyone who came in today. And yeah, thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Christopher. It was a lovely talk, and we would love to do it again. I know you have so much to share with us.
Well, thank you guys very much. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep getting out there and letting people know that this is happening. We really need to cross-pollinate this information and break down those academic, just really quickly, we were at one of the Mesoamerican symposiums, and all the historians saw what the historians saw, the archaeologists saw what the archaeologists. There was like nobody mixed. It was very interesting to examine that. So that needs to be broken down, and it has been broken down and continues to be breaking down. But you folks are the next generation, and learn from our mistakes, please. Learn from our mistakes and go forward and take it as far as you can, so that the reason I made that website is so that people start where I left off. I didn't a lot of that information is not in one place, and I wanted to put it all in one place just so that people could get to the next thing, leave me behind and way to the next thing. So keep doing what you're doing. You guys are the next. You will one day be the elders.
Thank you for your lecture.
Thank you.